This segment of the Chopin podcast is brought to you by the Chopin Foundation of the United States, presenters of the National Chopin Competition in Miami, Florida, January 2025.
So far in this series, we've been so fixated on the compositional wonders of Chopin and the finished interpretations of great pianists, we've neglected the actual practicing of the piano that makes such performances possible in the first place. So in this segment, I wanted to pop the hood on Chopin playing and look at the hard work that teachers and students put into the actual learning of this great music at the piano. And there are few people better suited to articulating and demonstrating the training of the hand and heart at the keyboard than Josh Wright. A medalist at the 2015 National Chopin Competition, Josh has become one of the most widely known and trusted music educators working today. His many hundreds of tutorials created for his Pro Practice platform and YouTube channel have helped countless pianists around the world hone their skills and master their repertoire. And among the more popular video lessons on his Pro Practice platform are, not surprisingly, those on Chopin's 4 Scherzos. I myself had the privilege to hear Josh perform Chopin's 3rd Scherzo live in Utah last year, and it blew me away. Josh is truly one of the rare musicians who's able to teach and perform at the highest level. So I've asked Josh to give us a mini masterclass of sorts on complementary passages from each of Chopin's 4 Scherzos. Keep in mind that the art of piano performance is at root an oral tradition, passed down in private lessons from teachers to students, who then become the teachers to a new generation of students, and the cycle continues. What I find so meaningful in Josh's teaching is how open he is about the debt he owes his primary teachers, namely Susan Duhlmeyer, Logan Skelton, and Sergei Babayan. And as viewers, we are lucky to be the beneficiaries of this legacy of insider knowledge as Josh talks shop at the keyboard. But it's not just our primary teachers who can leave an imprint on our musical lives. Indeed, Josh Wright had some encounters as a young pianist with a pair of well-known Chopin interpreters whose names might just ring a bell.
I have great memories with both Garrick Ohlsson and Kevin Kenner. I played the first ballade for Garrick Ohlsson when I was 16 or 17 years old, and perhaps the most memorable masterclass of my life, especially on that piece. And then Kevin Kenner, I've met several times at the Chopin competition. I've done it a few times. I wasn't, this phenom like Eric Liu that won it at 17. I finally made the finals on my last time through. But the one that really stuck out to me was when I was 16 years old. So at the final gala, all the judges were there, and most of them were drinking and having a good time. But I just remember Kevin was talking with a lot of the competitors, and I went up and I said, I don't know if you remember me because I got cut after the very first round. He's like, yeah, I do remember you. Hang on a second. He pulled out his notes, and it almost makes me emotional because he sat with this little 16-year-old kid who got cut in the first round after, hundreds of hours of listening to all of these competitors. And he said, I remember what you did here in the ballade. And he had taken such careful notes, and he was so invested in helping all young pianists, not just the finalists or the winners. So that was a very touching experience with Kevin Kenner. So big thanks to both of those luminary artists that are also on this podcast. They had a great influence on me pianistically and also as a person. I remember I wanted to be like that when I got older. I want to make sure that I'm invested in helping musicians develop.
So I have tasked Josh with picking one particularly distinctive, maybe even signature moment from each of the 4 scherzi, to pick each one so that they also complement each other as a whole, so that what we have here is a kind of paradigm of Chopin technique and pianism and piano playing that kind of runs the gamut of different physical and expressive techniques. So Josh, without further ado, why don't you go ahead and march through your 4 scherzo examples for us as pianists and also as listeners.
I'm going to do something a little out of the ordinary. I'm going to take these in reverse order, and there's a reason for that, because I think the things that I present in 4 can largely be applied to all the other ones. And number 1, I actually chose a somewhat obscure topic for that one. So I wanted to end with that. I didn't want to start with the most obscure example. So in the 4th Scherzo, we will be going over reducing tension and increasing confidence with chordal jumps. In Scherzo number 3, we're going to be going over fluidity and color in fast passage work. In Scherzo number 2, we are going to be talking about developing a good sense of rubato and this idea of creating long lines through the concept of choice and consequence. And in Scherzo number 1, I wanted to talk about pedaling and texture and how your choices with those can affect voicing and interpretation. So the first example are these little chords, quick jumping chords. So the first thing, after you've established a good fingering, I just like to start with the finger staccato. Is there a little bit of wrist staccato? Sure, but it's mostly activating the fingertips. And you can even do staccato on your dotted half notes. That's step number 1. What that's doing is it's getting you used to spending less time on the keys. Step number 2 is I generally like to give students a voicing exercise. So this is a concept I learned on this is where the exercise first was given to me by Susan Duhlmeyer, my lifelong teacher. I still go occasionally take a lesson with her from time to time. This, I think, is the greatest exercise I've ever learned. I've learned many other voicing exercises. This is my favorite. Forte and legato on top, staccato and piano on the bottom. What that does is it gets your hand used to putting more weight and speed and kind of leaning into that top. And it simplifies what the audience hears, and it also simplifies your thought processes as the performer, because rather than thinking three notes, and oh, what inversion am I in? You're just thinking just of that top line. It also gives it a lighter texture. After that, step number 3 is I will contrast that idea with what I just came up with for a student one time. I called it the slithering exercise, like you're a snake slithering along the keys. What we're doing here is we're trying to be as legato as we can, because then you realize the distances aren't as scary as a lot of pianists think. They think, oh my gosh, and it's so easy to get off. But if you just slither along, you say, oh, okay, there's some actual common tones here. My second finger plays this. And okay, that one is kind of a big jump there, but I can just think of maybe replacing my pinky with my thumb there. Very helpful exercise. Once you've done those 3 preliminary exercises, I start to give my students slightly harder exercises. These first 2 I actually learned from Sergei Babayan, who was instrumental. I maybe took 20 lessons throughout my life with Sergei Babayan. A majority of that was at 2 of his academies when he used to run those. He is my favorite Chopin player, and those lessons with Babayan were very special moments in my life, and I think it was the very first lesson that I learned both of these exercises. The first one is very similar to the finger staccato exercise that we did, but it's what I have just labeled free hands. So this is a way to get a lot more relaxed. Release into a neutral position. For those of you listening on the podcast, I'm not clenching a fist, but my fingers kind of go in to my palm a little bit, just so I know that I've truly released the position. I'm just playing all of these short and without pedal. If you do have a passage that has a lot of pedal and you're jumping around with chords, I would still recommend that you do this without pedal. Very, very helpful. The second exercise that quickly follows that is this strange wrist loosening exercise. What this does is it makes your impulses quicker at the piano, and this is what I call the up-down exercise, again taught by Sergei Babayan, but he said every student messes this up usually the first time, and I will vouch for that. Every student I've taught this to, because I messed it up in his lesson, and every student I've taught it to, they do one element correct and one element incorrectly. So the exercise goes like this. What I'm doing is I'm flipping my wrist back, so my fingertips are just about pointing at the ceiling. My arm can come up a little bit. And then I throw my hand back down into the next position, but don't play the next position. So I go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. What every student does correctly is they come up really quickly, and then they just let gravity or just a relaxing descent occur. They let gravity pull their hand back down. And so it's very slow. That's not training you to get into the position quickly. The up-down exercise, you throw the hand back down. And I can't even tell you how impactful that has been on like the third scherzo octaves. That is extremely helpful on those, or any other quick passage where you're having to jump into various positions. So the final step is just a little abbreviation of that up-down exercise. So just once you're used to that wrist flicking back and forth into the next positions, just move horizontally, because that's going to be the quickest way to get into position. So this concept of horizontal jumps after you've done that up-down exercise, just staying as close to the keys as you can. And this comes in handy at the end where we have that long descending chordal passage that extends this greatly. On Scherzo number 3, Ben asked me to do the Pixie Dust passage, which I love. That's a great title. Those can be extremely tricky and intimidating passages. The first thing I wanted to talk about is something a little out of the ordinary. I want to talk about the piano you're playing on. This is a very light and bright instrument. So one thing that I need, and I love that in an instrument, but you have to take the piano you're playing into consideration, because what a lot of students will do is they may underplay this on a bright piano, and then this sounds really loud. Or they might be on a very velvety piano, and they might do the opposite. So whatever piano you're playing on, you have to adjust your playing for that piano. So on this one, I want to make sure I'm loud enough on these chords that when I put the una corda pedal down, that it truly is velvety. And every piano's una corda pedal is slightly different too. So that's the first consideration, because we're talking about fluidity and color and voicing in fast passage work. So once we've done that, I want to take you through, again, a list of exercises and thought processes that have helped me on this particular passage. A good one to start with, a lot of students are not aligned up in their hands. So a good preliminary exercise is just eyes closed, going very slowly, and actually explaining a little bit about the piano. Say, you know, Steinway standard key dip is 4/10 of an inch, or 401 thousandths if you're talking to a piano technician, because you can get 397 1/1000ths of an inch, or 410 1/1000ths if you want a really deep key dip. So explaining that, like, okay, 4/10 of an inch, that is tiny. But imagine that 4/10, the bottom of that, you're hitting the key bed, and I want you, as you close your eyes, to hit that key bed at the exact moment, the exact same moment between the two hands. Sometimes that visual is all it takes for the student to get much more precise alignment. The next one is a little exercise that I personally find a little bit awkward. This is called the 4-3-2-1 exercise. I won't do the whole passage so you guys don't want to kill me. Here's 3. Here's 2, and then 1. It's so strange. When you get to 1 after playing 4 and then 3 and then 2 through the whole passage, it feels so smooth and really aligned. So that's another preliminary exercise that I like to do. And then this is something I made up for a student not too long ago. I call it the random rubato exercise. This is really good for helping students get their alignment tightened up. You just use random bits of rubato throughout the passage. Have them do that in several different ways. What that does is it makes the passage unpredictable. A lot of students will be aligned there and then get off when they need to switch positions. Now I want to get into something that Logan Skelton always talked about, my brilliant teacher at Michigan. He always said human beings are really good at 3 movements. So for those of you listening on the podcast, we're going to turn a doorknob. So he's like, we can do that really quickly. We can hinge our wrist up and down really quickly, and then we can wave really quickly, like you're waving to someone back and forth, kind of a semicircle rotation. He said the thing that we're really bad at as humans is wagging our fingers back and forth like your mom is scolding you. He said that's one of the pitfalls that we can fall into technically, and it certainly applies to this passage because a lot of students will try to manipulate their way around with no arm movement, no rotation, and they'll just use their fingers, and they're more stretched out in certain places and less stretched out. So one thing that we want to think about, Logan would always say, throw into your top notes. And I'm just turning the doorknob to the top, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. And coordinating that between the hands so you can say, okay, both my right hand and my left hand are turning that way, and then they're turning this way. The idea of using bigger muscles holistically, along with that, slurs, more or less, more or less, more or less, more or less, more or less. That's very helpful. And then add on forward and backwards. So add on is a technique of just taking a small cell and then just building up maybe a 4-note cell and then trying 8 notes. And then building up another small 4-note cell and then adding all those 12 notes together. You can similarly try it from the end. I actually like this one the best because you're always finishing. And then 4 more notes, and then 4 more notes, and then pretty soon you have the whole passage. If all else fails, one last kind of fix-all thing for getting rid of tension in students playing, because a lot of them will have tension playing these positions. And that will just be exacerbated if you don't get rid of the tension. So one thing that I like to do is this vibrato exercise. Pretend you're a strings player and just kind of shake on each note. And what that does is it gets you out of those positions. Very similar to the 4th scherzo, getting out of positions with the free hands and the up-down exercise. This shaking exercise can really help you feel free in these passages. Moving on to the 2nd scherzo, I wanted to talk about developing a good sense of rubato and also how we can create long lines and also create contrast within those long lines. We're going to be demonstrating from my favorite moment of this piece, and actually one of my favorite moments out of the entire piano repertoire and all of music. This is so tragic. It's like a mother weeping for her lost child. It's so profound. And a lot of students say, I have no idea how to push and pull time. I don't know where to do it. The first thing I like to do is say, what's the character you're trying to convey? I think the first time through, we've just come off of this gorgeous theme. And then we have this little bit of breathlessness. And so when we get to here, it's yearning, and yet it's a little bit dance-like. So how are we going to make a choice about what to do? I think the first time is an element of discovery. So don't be in a rush. This is the first time we've heard it. It's unexpected, and it's so profound. This is what I always walk away marveling at anytime I hear this piece. And Chopin even sets it up kind of as this mysterious, ambiguous place. Where is he going to go after here? So don't be in a rush. Maybe a little more energy. Reaching up to here. Maybe we feel an arrival here. You can really feel this bass. And what that does is it allows us to diminuendo through that last line, which may allow us to feature, if we're really soft here, we can feature this beautiful little contrasting line here. Contrasting with that, the second time it comes through, let's not be quite as melancholy. We know what we're getting, but let's throw in an element of surprise. So another way of figuring out what you want to do with rubato is to make a choice. And this is the idea of the choice and consequence I mentioned early on in the overview. And so I want to feature two special moments here. I think that in bar 317, rather than being a little more like we were the first time, I think maybe let's take a little bit of extra time there. And the first time we arrived in bar 325 and 326, let's contrast that with getting softer to here. And let's see what those two choices, just saying I want to take a special moment there and there, what does that do to the rest of the passage? Well, we got to kind of start the passage maybe with a little bit more energy than we did the first time. Little bit of a special moment there. Okay, now, Logan always told me, he said, you can do two things back to back, but if you do it a third, you're out of there, basically. Like, so we can't take time again in that really special subito pianissimo way. So what does that allow us to do? If we've just taken time and gotten softer here, well, now we have more energy to create contrast. Now it's a celebration. And that is just one of many possibilities in that section of how making just a few simple choices. The first one was a character choice. I want this to be an element of discovery. Slowly discovering, slowly getting the momentum in this passage. And once we have that element of discovery satiated, and it comes again, maybe I'm more dance-like. We think it's gonna go big, but a special moment. Another thing you can do here is feel these little sighing left-hand figures. G sharp, A, E sharp, F sharp, bass to the G sharp. Fun little middle or inner lines can also enhance something, very much like you would vary a Scarlatti sonata repeated section with ornamentation. You can feature different lines in Chopin's music when there is repeated materials.
Here's the passage the first time around. And now when the passage repeats.
Let's move on to Scherzo number 1. This was the easiest scherzo to learn the notes of, and in many ways it was, from my hands, one of the hardest scherzos to get really fast and cleanly. These are very difficult passages. But more than that, and this is a main theme throughout this entire session, what do we do musically in here? This is the hardest, I think, of all the scherzi to interpret well. There's so many contrasting sections. We get done with all this fury, and then we have these very introspective passages. So when we get to the agitato section, which is many pianists' favorite section, just of what they've told me, and it was certainly one of mine. Now that was a very pedaled version. Maybe we do half pedal. Or maybe we do no pedal. That, again, is a choice and consequence. How much pedal you use may affect the lines that you voice. For instance, let me just point out a couple of different things that we could do. If we're going to do a more pedaled version, because this can get really muddy, we have to be really deliberate with how we voice. So if we're doing a really light and dry rendition, it's a lot easier to play that. You don't have to worry so much about the voicing, but you have to worry about, I have to say, I don't love kind of the flippant, and I know Chopin has a crescendo mark there. We could get into those hairpin marking interpretations, as I know you have, Ben. You covered that, right, Ben? Interpreting Chopin symbols. Okay.
Well, yeah. It's mostly it's Seymour Bernstein who who has a whole thing about hairpins actually having to do with timing, even more than dynamics.
Yeah, and I really like that concept right there. If you're going to do more pedaled and more kind of heartfelt yearning, be really deliberate with those voicings. All right, now, this is a line that Susan Dolmeyer pointed out that I haven't heard in many recordings. Very interesting line that you don't often hear. If you're going to do a more pedaled version, that works. Similarly, the tops. If you're doing that more heartfelt pedaled version with more rubato, you're going to want to maybe take a little bit more time and place that first voiced note there on this long descent. So it'll sound something like this. And then it's up to you. If you like this dry, which is fine. In the Ecure edition, there is pedaling, though, and I think that gives us an opportunity to perhaps be a little bit more heartfelt and possibly even bring out another strange inner line in Josh Wright style. Here we go. So, and because this isn't like the most cohesive melodic line, I think you can get away with things like that. So it might sound something like this. Might even guide a little bit of your rubato choice. Maybe more there and then a little less, more, less, resolve. And then it starts this long ascent with a new texture. So I hope that provides a little bit of insight as to the importance of pedal choices on the textures you create and the consequences that follow from those initial choices. Again, I'm not here to advocate any particular way of interpretation. There's enough recordings out there. This is a huge world, and we have so many wonderful recordings. The listener can make their own choices about what they like or what they dislike. But I hope today's session, through these 4 examples, can get the wheels turning, thinking, what could I maybe do a little bit more deliberately?
Here's a version with more pedal. And this version is more dry. This episode has been brought to you by the Chopin Foundation of the United States. Established by Lady Blanka Rosenstiel in 1977, the Chopin Foundation has championed the music of Chopin and helped launch the careers of countless young American pianists for nearly a half-century. To support the Chopin Foundation, visit chopin.org/donate.